Hello, I'm Marcia. I'm a creative artist. I specialise in oil painting and I also tutor in art. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do oil painting techniques. For this video, I have already laid out an array of colours that you commonly see in nature. That's your blues, your greens, your yellows and your browns. We also have a natural sponge, an old rag, various size brushes, from very small to very large. Sometimes when you find it difficult to define the colours, it really helps to squint, and then it's much easier to define what's the darkest and what's the lightest. Now that I'm squinting, I can see that this area here is dark, this area here is dark, and this is quite dark. Whereas originally with my eyes unsquinted, it just looks blue. Right, so the reason why I'm using the sponge on the stick is because it's lighter, softer texture, and it's also got the point here, the ridge, so I'm able to kind of do the, sort of give a slight kind of rippling effect with the edges of that. So I'm using the sponge again just to blend in the blue that I've made for the sea area with some Viridian green, and I think it still gives me that directional flow of the sea, so it has that slight appearance of it being the sea and not the sky, which is a completely different texture. So I'm just going to add in just a hint, not too much, of the green over here, to create slight rippling effect. You can use gels and other mediums to build up texture, which there are an array of gels and paste that you can use. And on your second layer, you might want to take your strokes down, make them a bit smaller and more defined, but for the moment I'm just adding broad colour, but very loosely and very dry. I'm going to go for a larger brush, because the further I go away, the looser the strokes are going to be. So I'm just using the tip of the brush to create almost like a receding stone rock structure. Okay, so there are many different techniques that I've used in this painting. I've used obviously the brush. When I first started, I used a larger brush to whitewash across here. Also the sponge on the stick to whitewash and blend across the whole area, and then I drew in the basic lines, sort of keeping in tone with the rhythm of the painting with a smaller brush. Then after that I built up with short darting strokes all around the mountains and the sea. I did some rippling effects, and the grass and all the dry shrubs. I used brush strokes along with 2 palette knives to bring out the grass-like texture. So I used the palette knives in some areas where I wanted it to be denser, and in other areas I just picked up on where I used the palette knife and just smoothed along with my brush, using the flat of the brush and also the tip of the brush. Along here I used a palette knife in flat areas to create some build-up of texture. Along these areas I used the natural sponge, and the same thing I done to the larger tray, use a natural sponge, the palette knife along here to build up some bold colour, and dragging along and combining the flat bold colour of the white titanium oil paint. I used the dry brush, which created a texture and gave more of a 3D effect to the trunk. So I carried on up along there, and I just blended the stippling effect of the natural sponge with the dry brush strokes, and in some areas a bit more wet to keep it nice and fluid. Along here I built up just behind this mountain with flat areas of paint and blended in with my fingers just to give a more fluid passing, smooth effect in the sky, and also to distinguish from the other areas which are a bit more dry. And in this area I wanted to create some depth between the left side and the right side, so I built up a little bit more. Had a little mistake here, rubbed it off, patched it back up with some white paint, which works really nicely actually to help to build up the painting and help this area to kind of stand out a bit more. So I kept these coastline rather dry, the mid ground and over this side here I used a dry brush plus a dry palette knife with thick paint, but I just kind of danced across on the canvas with a knife. I didn't want to add too much texture because I wanted it to stay in the background, but I also wanted to create a contrast on this side as well, where you could see mountain, hillside in a distance, almost kind of touching the skyline, which is still quite faint and cool and calming over the mountain surface. These are some of the things you can do when you're practicing oil painting techniques.